There are fairies on the farm.
My novel, The Ghost of Nothing, is now an award winner, so if you like this channel, I know you'll like it, so be sure to check it out. It's available at bookstores and on audio. This happened in New Hampshire. I was around 7 at the time. It was at Lake Winnipesaukee at Girl Scouts camp. It was a great trip, though the cabins, especially the toilets, were scary. And even though it was summer, it was dark, cloudy, and chilly at night, despite the bonfires we built and the Girl Scout songs we sang. One afternoon, the camp counselors instructed us to take the paddle boats out on the lake in pairs or groups of 3. But I thought I was strong enough paddler to take the boat out by myself, so I ignored these instructions. The part of the lake that I paddled the boat on was swampy and green. I went off on my own. I remember feeling quite content exploring the lake by myself when, as I was looking at the yellow reeds and dead leaves floating on the surface of the lake, I saw a face looking back at me. It very clearly wasn't human, and it very clearly wasn't a snapping turtle because I've seen those before, as well as frogs near the ponds and canals where I live. No, this was a bulging-eyed face with a body that seemed to extend far beneath the water. And I had the feeling of it being very large. I felt immediately that this was a fairy or some kind of river troll. It blinked at me and smiled. Then I heard my mother, who was a Girl Scout leader, calling me to paddle back quite frantically. I assumed she was concerned about my safety out on the lake alone, even though I'd been wearing a life jacket and was a careful paddle boater. I remember looking at her and then glancing back towards the thing I'd seen. The face was still there, now half submerged in the water. It had long strands of kelp-like hair and these giant, very black, glassy, bulbous eyes, such as a frog or a fish. It blinked at me, and I could see that, yes, it was very big from the size of its mouth. Its mouth looked like a line, like someone had drawn a gash or a split on its face. There was something cartoonish about the way it obviously wasn't a frog or a turtle and seemed to be human-like and friendly. I stared at it for a moment and then just paddled away. As I headed back to the shore, I glanced once more back over my shoulder at the fairy amongst the reeds. It slowly sank under the water as if to say goodbye, and I saw bubbles, human-like blowing bubbles, float up to the surface. After this happened, the sky began to darken, and I was suddenly very aware of how alone and vulnerable I was out there on the lake by myself. So I hastily paddled back to the shore. When I got back, I didn't tell my mother what I had seen, but I did tell my fellow Girl Scout friend. She told me it was probably just a big frog, but I don't see how that's possible. I've seen pictures of the biggest frog in the world, the Goliath frog, and it's nowhere near the size of the thing I saw. Plus, it's not native to North America. I don't think what I saw was a frog or any kind of reptile I know of. And I still don't know if what I saw was a fairy or troll or what. I just saw its face and head poking half through the surface of the water, and the rest of its body was imagined but seemed to be very deep and very large underneath the water. I believe fairies are real because I saw one that day, and I can't come up with another explanation for what it was. I was probably just a month or two shy of 15 at the time this happened. It was the summer school holidays, and I was visiting my grandparents at their 75-acre farm by the river on the mid-north coast of New South Wales in Australia. This was about a 4-hour drive south of where my family and I were living at the time. The land was mainly cleared as my grandparents ran dairy cattle and had a market garden. But about 50 meters behind the house by the river was a large thicket of bush, probably about 30 meters by 10 meters, which as a small kid freaked me out. I was sure something big and hairy and not cow related lived in there, and while I'd wander all over the farm, I'd always steer well clear of that thicket, and I never understood why my Nana and Pop never cleared it. I always felt the presence there, although I couldn't articulate what it was. The particular night this incident happened, everyone had gone to bed, and I had also drifted off to sleep. I remember waking up to the sound of a low, consistent hum coming from outside in the yard. The house was in darkness, and I could hear the gentle snores of the more nocturnally vocal members of my family coming from the other bedrooms, and my younger brother was sleeping soundly in the bed next to mine. But this hum, this deep and reverberating purr, was unusual, not a part of the normal sounds of the house at night. It was a hot and sticky midsummer night, so we all just slept with a light cotton top sheet covering us. Yet the sound felt ominous to me, so I pulled my sheet and a blanket up over my head. Sweating like anything, I lay there under the covers with all of my senses on high alert. Then I heard the front door open, and soon after, I heard the footfalls of someone coming inside the house. I very gingerly poked my head out from under the covers and looked out the window. I could see a soft green glow outside. It wasn't moonlight or some other lights, just a strange, eerie, soft green glow coming out of the ground, illuminating the garden as if there were millions of glowworms out there. This, along with the hum and the weird sounds of someone coming into the house, were a bit much for me, and I threw the covers back over my head. I think I must have somehow fallen asleep at some point after this, because the next thing I remember, I think, was a dream. 3 very tall, luminescent beings were standing next to my bed. I thought of them as elves, as they seemed to me to come from the earth rather than outer space. I don't recall any other details except that they look like those Australian indigenous rock art paintings of spirit beings, very tall and luminous. I don't have any memory of what happened after that. The next thing I remember was hearing my family in the kitchen having breakfast. I got up feeling very groggy and foggy, and a bit disoriented, and went out to join them. I asked if anyone had gotten up during the night to go outside maybe and come back in, but no one had. Then my mom asked me if I'd been chewing on a pen. I said, "No, I just woke up. Why?" She told me that I had a small blue dot on my bottom lip and also one on my chin. That's weird, I thought. Then she started brushing my hair to braid it and asked me again, "Are you sure you haven't been playing with ink?" Again, I said no, I'd just woken up. And anyway, where would I get ink from? I did like to draw, but I only ever used pencil. My hair was long back then, down to my hips, and my mom held up the bottom ends and said, "Look, the bottom 3 inches of your hair have blue strands running through them. You'd better go wash it out." This was completely bizarre. There were no bottles of blue ink in the house or blue pens, and there weren't any ink stains on my pillow or my clothes or anywhere else except for the bottom of my hair and the 2 spots on my face, one on my lip and one on my chin. It didn't make sense. I couldn't wash the blue out of my hair or off my face. Mom ended up cutting the part of my hair off that had the blue, but the blue dot on my lip and chin has never gone away. The one on my chin has faded a little over time, but the one on my lip is still as clear as it was the day it mysteriously appeared when I was 15. To this day, no one knows how the spots got there or what happened during that night. Members of my family have had other experiences there, and someone once told me that there had been an Aboriginal presence on that land. I'm not sure if there's a connection. I felt the experience was fairy because it felt very connected to the earth. I think fairies are the other, interdimensional beings, neither inherently good nor bad. In the past, I still often get asked about the blue dot on my lip and what its significance is, or why I chose to get a tattoo there. With most people who ask or comment, I'm very reluctant to tell them the real origin of its appearance, but it does trigger an emotional response. I feel a bit on the fringe of things as it is, so it's nice to be able to share my experience without judgment. When I was younger, before I was a teenager, I used to live on a ranch with my family. It was very beautiful. There was a huge creek running behind it and a small forest that we shared with one of our faraway neighbors. Back then, I used to go down to the creek to swim with my dog and my older sister. But on one particular day, I believe I was 12, I went down to the creek on my own. No sister, no dog, just me. And before I sat down in my usual spot in front of this giant rock, I heard this tingling sound. I looked behind me, thinking it might be my mom calling me for dinner, because it was almost dinner time. But it wasn't my mom, and no one was outside. I was very confused, and I thought maybe my mind was just playing games since it had been my first time out there all alone. So I sat down and put my feet into the water. I was planning to swim. But then I felt something touch me. This is hard to explain, but it wasn't like something touched my skin, but like something went right through me and touched, I don't know, my veins? If you've ever had an electric shock, it was kind of like that. I shivered and I just felt like I had to get out of there right away. I had this feeling that something not human was in the creek. I never went down there alone again, and as I got older, I thought about the incident less and less. But then, as an adult, I went back to visit, this time with my young daughter. She spent a lot of time down at the creek like I used to do. I didn't think much of it until she told me she has a friend that lives down there who talks to her. That's when I remembered my experience. Her description of this friend immediately made me think fairy. I don't let her go down there alone anymore. You just never know with fairies, and it's better to be safe than sorry. This happened in Yorkshire. I was with my husband and my 2 kids. We were on a long hike on a sunny afternoon and stopped by some waterfalls along the river for lunch. It was a lovely spot with interesting mushrooms growing about. I was eating my sandwiches, daydreaming and looking at the trees, when I saw a daddy long-legged type creature hovering in front of me. The strange thing is, it didn't have daddy legs, but more physical and human-like legs. The wings were more dragonfly type, and it was brown in color. But the way it hovered and its shape, I knew this wasn't a bug. I know a bit about fairies, and I thought right away that I was looking at some sort of sylph or a tree fairy. Then I blinked and it was gone. I can't say for sure that what I saw was a fairy. I've seen ghosts, and this was nothing like that. And there's just no way that that thing was a bug. I think fairies are a race that live alongside us on a slightly different vibration. They are beings that are part of the land, unseen by us, largely because we aren't rooted in the land. Beings that occupy a slightly different dimension. My husband and I took a trip into the mountains to camp for a few days. We hiked to a camping site near a large pond. It was during a tropical storm, so it rained quite a bit. Despite the storm, or maybe because of it, I felt a sort of serenity the whole time we were out there, like there was something magical there and it was affecting me. The second day, we made the decision to hike down the mountain and back to our Jeep, which was parked in a lot for campers and hikers, so we could drive to the nearest store to pick up some supplies. It was still raining when we left. After an hour or two of getting supplies, we headed back. The road leading to the parking lot was a narrow dirt road. On the right side was a wall of steep mountain woods. On the left, a cliff dropped off into a rushing river. While driving up the road, another car was driving toward us from the opposite direction. Being courteous, my husband pulled his Jeep to the side to let the small car pass safely. Unfortunately, due to the weather, that side of the road was so muddy under my husband's Jeep that we got stuck. We were lucky enough that the rain cleared up soon after and the sun was peeking through the trees, so things weren't complicated by yet more rain. Even still, we tried for an hour to get the Jeep unstuck. We were at our wits' end and about to give up and begin walking back to town when my husband sighed and said he'd give it one last try. I was scared because if he hit the gas too hard, there was nothing to keep his Jeep from jumping the cliff into the river. I stood a little way away watching my husband punch the gas as hard as he could. I was so scared hearing the loud friction of his wheels hit against the dirt. In that moment, I began to talk out loud, praying that the Jeep would get free without jumping the cliff, that something, anything, would come and help us. It was then that a small moth, with wings so blue they almost glowed, hovered in front of my face. It was as if it was looking at me. Suddenly, the noise of the grinding tires dimmed, and a wave of relief came over me. I felt calm. In my head, I heard a voice say, "It'll all be okay." Then the moth flew away. The sounds around me went back to normal, and a split second later, the Jeep broke free, and my husband hit the brakes just in time to keep from going over the cliff. It felt almost miraculous. I know that I just saw a moth, but something inside of myself that hadn't thought of fairies in a long time immediately said that was a fairy. I don't know where the thought came from, but I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. When we got back to our camp, I said thank you to the woods. I truly feel without the help of whatever that was, the situation could have gone very wrong. This moth just fluttered right in front of my face. It had baby blue wings, more vibrant than anything I've seen before. The Jeep was stuck and in a precarious position, and then suddenly it wasn't. I do think something otherworldly helped us that day. I don't know what fairies are, spirits of another realm maybe, but I do think they helped us that day, and I'm grateful. My wife is originally from the Philippines. When we got married, we decided to have the ceremony there so her friends and family could attend. We stayed at a beautiful hotel. In front of the hotel was a mountain, and behind it was an aquamarine colored river with large sandbars, as it was the dry season. We were there at the end of March. One night, something made me wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. Our room was on the second floor and had sliding glass doors with a view of the river. I had the urge to look out the glass doors. I got up, moved the blinds to the side, and a few seconds later, I saw what looked like a fluttering light coming from across the river. It continued over the top of the hotel, heading towards the mountain across the street. Within seconds, there was another light, and another. Soon it looked almost like a Roman candle fireworks shooting off from various angles, but all flying over the hotel. Eventually, some started flying back down toward the river. When one would fly close to the surface of the water, you could see the reflection. I woke my wife, and we watched these beings for 2+ hours doing this. The next night, around the same time, it happened again. Again I woke up, again I looked outside, and again I saw these floating lights. But this time it only lasted 1.5 hours. I wanted to record this with my phone, but I was scared whatever the light beings were would sense me recording them and might threaten me in some way. As I continued to watch them, my reverence for their beauty made me not want to record. I tried to estimate the location the next day that they were coming from, but the bridge crossing the river near the hotel is a ways away. If I had to guess, it seemed that they had a task that they were attending. It almost looked like an airport time-lapse video with them flying in and out of the ground, or maybe a very busy beehive. They were illuminated, shimmering, and very fast flying. They would go from ground level to over the top of the hotel in about a second. If I had to guess, this was a distance of 200 or 300 yards. My wife's family speaks about the existence of beings just beyond our visual frequency sense. Why do I think they were fairies? Their appearance, the fluttering, the shimmering, the light coming from them. I do believe fairies exist and that they live their own lives for the most part, unconcerned about us. It was 1961, spring, just before we, Americans, returned to the U.S. from Beirut, Lebanon, where we had lived for 6 years. I was near the age of 7. My family had left America when I was 18 months old to live for a while in Beirut. At that time, Lebanon was still a beautiful country. It was spring, and my parents and I went on a picnic. A basket held our simple lunch and a bottle of new wine from a nearby monastery. We climbed a hill overlooking a stream sacred to Adonis, god of spring and rebirth. At the first spot we chose, we found ourselves annoyed by flies, so my father suggested we relocate to a nearby hilltop where the ruins of an ancient shrine remained. The floor of the shrine was now green grass, and inside the circle of tumbled and broken columns, no flies bothered us. In gratitude and romantic whimsy, my mother suggested that I pour a libation of wine in thanks before we began our picnic. She said it had probably been a long time since the god was brought on offering, and that he might be thirsty. I remember pouring wine upon the earth in silence. Later, uninterested in my parents' conversation and having had enough to eat, I wandered off to pick wildflowers. As I came closer to the edge of the hilltop, I could see the stream below, and I made my way down to it. On my way, I gathered wildflowers and then left a bouquet of them next to the stream, a second offering to a forgotten god. I stood there for a while listening to the sounds of the river when, out of a crevice in the rock, a large caterpillar crawled and went straight to the flowers I had laid on the ground. I don't know why, but I had a strong sense that this caterpillar wasn't just a caterpillar. It was something else. I can't describe the feeling, only that I felt very certain of it at the time. And from that moment on, I started to have strange experiences that I feel were triggered by that event. I would see orbs of light from time to time, about 6 inches in diameter, floating about my family's house. I've heard voices over the years as well, and general haunting phenomenon. These experiences have continued since my family left Lebanon and up to the present day. They haven't been unpleasant experiences, they haven't felt dangerous or malicious, more playful or curious. I think with the offerings of the flowers and the wine that day, something might have attached itself to me, something that appeared to me at first as a caterpillar. I think fairy is the best way to describe it. I don't feel afraid of this presence, more used to it now. Actually, I think I might miss it if it went away. So maybe the attachment goes both ways. I'm grateful for the experience anyway, and I don't regret it. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all those who submitted their stories for this one. Special thank you goes out to all my subscribers, new or long time. We recently reached 40,000 subscribers on the channel, so it's pretty cool that there are so many people interested in this topic. So just thank you so much for being here. If fairies are your thing, you should definitely consider checking out my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing, if you haven't already. It's inspired by the kind of fairy stories I read on this channel and traditional Irish fairy folklore. It's a spooky, kind of Tim Burton-esque fairy tale, and I think you'll find it different than other fairy novels out there. It's much more rooted in folklore, and it has what I can only describe as that fairy feeling, which either gets captured in fiction or does not. And I think my novel does capture it, so please be sure to check it out if you're interested. All the links are in the description. As always, if you have a true fairy encounter story to share, you can check out the channel's website at scaryfairygodmother.com, link in the description. It has a spot where you can submit your stories, comments, questions, or suggestions. You can also sign up for my mailing list, which is dedicated to the channel Fairy Lights. That's where I talk about all things fairy. You can also head over to my writing website, linked below, for more on my writing and the fairy world I've developed specifically for my books. And there's also a mailing list for updates just on my writing. It's called The Shaken Tree. Extra special thanks, as always, goes out to all my supporters on Patreon and to anyone who joined the channel or made a one-time donation. I really appreciate you guys so much and the support you are giving this work. If you like this channel, the stories I tell here, and would like to lend your support, please check out my Patreon page and the other support options in the description below. I've started to upload versions of my videos that are ad-free, stories only, no intro, outro for channel members and Patreon members, so if that's something you're interested in, please consider becoming a member. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so thanks to everyone who submitted. To read the Census stories, please follow the link in the description. The stories were edited for dramatic and narration reasons. Please leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. It helps the channel so much when you do that, and hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.